You are a PM at a large GC and you've been given a $500 million project. How do you set up the project for success to just nail that baseline?
Where my mind goes first is how do I capture all the known risks and de-risk them as quickly as I can. When people start thinking about minimizing the chance of failure, we're doing two things. One is we're acknowledging that inherently we can't control everything. Right? There's too many moving parts and we can't control everything. You start to eliminate the type 1 mistakes, right? What is going to make the project not be profitable? What's going to maybe even bankrupt the company, right?
And we'd all be sitting in a room and it would be the whole whiteboard thing, and it would, someone would be presenting P6, and it was just, to be honest, boring as hell, because you'd be interacting for like 10 minutes and sitting there doing nothing for 30 because you had nothing to add.
The builders and the planners who have so much in their head can't actualize their thoughts because the tool's too hard to use, right? And that's the problem we want to solve, is make the tool very approachable so builders can be builders.
Hi, folks. A quick one before we dive into this week's episode. Our book, The Critical Path Career, How to Advance in Construction and Planning and Scheduling, is out now, and you can order it on Amazon. We'll include a link below. This is a great way to show support for the Beyond Deadlines podcast, and Greg and I have worked extremely hard, taking everything we know in our 30 years of experience, plus everything we've picked up from shooting this podcast, and we've tried to pack it into an information-dense book that you can use right away. In the book, we have specific strategies on how to get a raise, how to get a promotion, and find a new job. We include 26 of the best interview questions that we have come across, in addition to 34 specific impact ideas that you can go use on your projects today. We want to thank everyone who's shown us support so far, and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that planning and schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah. I'm a planning and scheduling manager for Intel.
My name is Greg Lawton. I'm the CEO of an AI schedule management company called Nodes and Links.
Hi, everyone. Nitin Bhandari, co-founder and CEO of a scheduling and planning software called Planera.
Perfect. Today, folks, Nitin is on the hot seat, and he is tasked with building a baseline schedule. Nitin, you are a PM at a large GC, and you've been given a $500 million project. You're very early on in the process, and you have full control over the outcomes. You've really started to focus in on the planning and scheduling piece. So how do you set up the project for success to nail that baseline?
Yeah, I think baseline, wow, that's like well begun is more than half done, right? Like we all will obviously face a lot of unknown unknowns, but where my mind goes first is how do I capture all the known risks and de-risk them as quickly as I can. And so the way I would go about setting it up is I would go make sure that I have the tools and the people that can help me understand the risks that the project may face, and how do I get everybody's best input to make sure that we have a plan that can both deal with the risks, but also the contingencies and the unknowns, that like the stuff that we can anticipate, right? And so I would want large participation from various subject matter experts, both from like the pre-con side, the design side of things, then also from the construction side of things. Bring them all on in the same room, either physically or virtually. Bring them all in the same tool and start breaking down the schedule. I would start from probably the level 1, like the milestones, start going down level of details until I have a fairly good, both a baseline plan, but also a buy-in, right? Like the buy-in from all the key stakeholders and alignment is what I think is the most important outcome of a good scheduling and planning exercise, is the alignment and buy-in.
Yeah, and this is Beyond Deadlines. We love to get into tactics. So let's just start with that. You mentioned one large room, people together. Can you kind of just walk me through how do you tee that up for success? Because, if this is a big project, you might have 30, 40 people in that room, and those situations can quickly devolve into chaos or not give you the outputs you want. So when you think about that, is it like a couple day workshop? How are you starting to structure that so you get the best efficiency out of the time spent?
A combination of in-person and asynchronous collaboration, right? What Nobody can be productive for 8 hours at a stretch and 2 days, right? Like it just doesn't work that way. So what I would do is bring people together synchronously, either again in the same room or virtually, go over some high level goals and objectives. We're going to break this down into like what's our highest level WBS, right? Who's owns what part of the WBS? What do we want to accomplish? And then empower them to go off, maybe work on their own, maybe bring in a few more people that they want to collaborate with on those parts of the project. But these are not like necessarily 16 different PDFs with like 36 emails going back and forth, right? Like imagine if you could do all of this work like asynchronous, but still on the same, like Google Docs, right? If you're gonna write Google Docs, we might break down the Google Docs into multiple sections. I just got done with a board meeting. We had like head of marketing, head of sales. We figured out what the higher level talking points are, and they were all writing their stuff. We felt like we were together, but we weren't necessarily locked in a room, right? I would do something like that, right? But then come back together, review everyone's work, figure out sort of, okay, now what we're concerned about, go back and repeat that until the whole team feels like we're kind of 90%, 95% there. And then nothing beats like a final review that's all in the same room, again, physically or virtually, and going through risks and concerns and mitigation plans.
So I love this subject, and I've got a million questions. This episode could go on for like 4 hours, but the first one that is really on the tip of my tongue is I've worked on so many projects that don't have a detailed design or don't have a fully clear scope of work at the start. How would you create the kind of tipping points between where you're doing breakdown planning, detailed initial planning, and forward wave planning?
How would I break those phases down?
Well, how would you break it down? Because you can build, you could build a baseline. For example, we could just say our baseline plan is only going to be to level 3. But there could be components that we need to start digging on Monday where we're like, we need to do them to level 6. But there could also be an element like commissioning where we're like, we have no idea until later on what we're going to do. So it might be a level 2. So I'm like, I guess, a wider esoteric question is baseline management a one-time thing, or does baseline management continue as you in the projects where you do forward wave planning?
That's such a great question. I believe that it is a ongoing process. You can only see so clearly so far in the future, right? And so I envision a world where it's forward wave planning, as you're saying, like, hey, I got to start doing this part of the pre-con work right away. I need more levels of detail. So imagine a world where there's a baseline, but then you also have a phase plan, right? And you say between this and this milestone, I can go much more granular. I can now start work on this. We envision you take a little phase out of that. You do collaborative pull planning, right? That's when pull planning and things like that make a lot of sense.
What's pull planning?
I'm sorry?
What's pull planning, just for the audience?
So think of pull planning as we say between this and this milestone, we have this high level plan. But now how are we going to actually deliver this, right? Everybody who's going to be involved in that, all the stakeholders, let's get together, put some sticky notes on the wall, right? And let's put them all in a organized sequence. What is the sequence? And what are the interdependencies and handoffs, right? So pull planning would be a way where all the dependencies are understood and work is broken down into some granular level of detail. A little trivia, pull planning, the term came from like actually supply chain, like on packaged goods, right? When you would put, I don't know if you've already covered in the podcast.
It comes from drum buffer rope methodologies in manufacturing.
Exactly. So all of the interdependencies that are going to happen, the butterfly effects, you want to try and capture those. So we envision a world where you might take certain phases of your schedule, you might do detailed pull planning, you might even start actualizing those, but it's not happening in Excel, right? It's not happening in a completely different platform. Imagine if all of this was still on the same platform where your master schedule, your phase plans, and then from that will come your 2-week, 3-week look ahead, right? If all of that is using the same both user interface constructs as well as the same data, then the information is all connected, right? So you can start actualizing these phase plans while you're still formulating your sort of forward-looking baseline. And then when it comes time to update the progress, that information is all available. It's not automatically applied to the baseline. Nobody would want your master schedule to get updated automatically. But imagine if all of this information was available and you go like, yep, apply. Actually, no, this one I don't want to apply. I want to have more discussion. So I'm maybe getting a little ahead of myself.
No, I'm gonna pull that again. I got a million questions. Sorry, Micah. Right, so
I'll forgive you this time.
I want to actually grow this scenario.
I am marking a mark for every question you ask in a row. It's $20. So
whatever. I'm going to throw you $1,000 today. Right, I'm going to blow the scenario above, which is okay. So let's imagine the scenario is you've done so well at doing all of this baseline management and project delivery that you get promoted to being the head of project or the head of PM across an entire organization. Governance is now your thing. Governance and process, where you need to make sure that, as you said at the start, people are collaborating in the correct way in order to de-risk the operations that they're going into, so the business has the minimum amount of liabilities and the highest level of upside. How can you start to systematize the implicit processes that people do? But implicit processes mean it depends on the quality and experience of individual people in individual locations on individual projects. So how do you start to think about that level of governance and systematization?
There's at least two things that have to happen. One is people have to know what the right thing to do is, and then they have to also do those things, right? And so software can help in both ways. The most basic thing is, if our corporate policy is that we must update our working schedules every Monday by 9 a.m., that's super easy for software to both enforce and then alert if somebody is not adhering to the policy, right? So having best practices in terms of policy, and then for software to bubble up, like, hey, of these projects that I'm overseeing, here are the ones where updates are lacking behind or participation rate is low, right? We want all our trades to update progress, but the super is doing it, right? Okay, let's go train our trades to actually do these things, right? So adherence to the policy is where software can absolutely play a massive role. Training of like what the best practices are, like when this happens, then what, right? Like that software can help. Software is getting more and more intelligent all the time, but I think that's where like it's a little bit of behavioral transformation in the industry. It's a little bit of sort of a corporate culture thing as well, right? And so that's where I'm sort of, I feel like it's a combination of a human aspect to it as well as software. But then adherence to the best practices is absolutely something that software can and should do, especially as you start to roll up. Like, it's hard enough to manage one project and all of the things that are happening in one project. And now you're starting to like, hey, you just gave me a promotion, so thanks, Greg. But now it gets really interesting, right? Which is, I shouldn't have to go into each project and figure out from change logs kind of like what's happening, right? Software needs to tell me where I need to focus my time, my most productive hours, right? Because everyone has only so many productive hours every day.
Speaking of software, one question I had, just shifting gears a little bit, but now that you've gotten your promotion, you're very qualified to answer it. So I hope you've spent your bonus wisely. When you're thinking about software,
Although I do have some imposter syndrome, but yeah, go ahead.
Hey, fake it till you make it, baby. When you think about that implementation of software, because we kind of glossed over that, we just assumed that the team bought into that software at the beginning. How are you going to, when you go into that baseline process and then as you expand it to like the broader company, but like you want to bring in a new tool, everyone's been using the old tool. Now you have not only a complex baseline process, which you're trying to get buy-in for and manage, the interpersonal everything, but you're also now trying to get that new software going. How would you tackle that?
In general, it's a very hard problem, right? People want to, like, builders are busy. They don't want to keep learning new tools. It gets easier if the software you're trying to replace has really bad NPS, right? Net Promoter Score. If people are frustrated with it, then change becomes a little bit easier. But regardless, what is the most important thing is, do they see immediate value is by switching to something new? Is that going to make their lives a little bit better, right? So software has to deliver value, not just for executives or PXs, but the actual users of the software, right? And number two, I don't believe that in our industry you can push software top down. Sometimes you can, like some things, financials, ERP, yeah, it has to be top down. But project related software has to have both buy-in from the top, but also buy-in from the project teams, right? And so you have to get some buy-in and make some projects successful, and then they become your internal champions, right? As you try to go to more projects within that company, right? And so software has to enrich their lives. It could be as simple as, hey, you wouldn't have to print 36 pages of something, mark it up in Bluebeam, attach it to another email and send it, and then wait for another email response, because software is going to make it all easy, and you'll get 8 minutes a day of your life back to do whatever you want to do with it, right? You can do squats, you can go talk to your kids, you can actually go do another job walk, whatever it is, right? It has to add meaningful value to everybody, not just executives, for it to be truly adopted in a construction company.
Yeah, I like that.
I mean, depends. If it is only for executives, then it only has to appeal to them, right? But I'm talking about my software our company makes, which is scheduling and planning, right? A lot of people have to interact with it.
Yeah, and on a baseline, that's kind of where the angle is going at. You're having a lot of interactions. You also mentioned risks earlier, and I found that was interesting. The first thing you brought up was risks. Turns out Greg's company does a little bit on the risk management side. So walk to me as you, through that process, how are you capturing the risks as you go? Because you probably brought up some early ones like, oh, we got to get the steel mill order in early because we don't want to miss the roll date and there's winter coming or whatever, but there's the knowns. Then as you go through that collaborative process, there's probably more little risks bubbling up. Then at the very end, you have a baseline where you want to start looking at how those risks are impacting that baseline. So as you think about that process, how would you make sure when you got to the end that the risk level that you're going to accept from that baseline is well known and well communicated?
To me, risk is either a deterministic risk where you can do a what if, right? Like, hey, what if this happens? What's our response to this risk, right? And so you have to have in baseline, I think before you lock down a baseline, hopefully you're doing dozens and dozens of scenarios, right? Maybe you're not doing those, maybe you're doing 3 or 4, but each risk is basically another scenario of the plan and the schedule that you have to analyze, right? So that's a deterministic aspect of a risk, right? If we don't hit this thing by such and such date, then we're going to have a closure in the work window, right? We can't work, salmon's migrating or whatever, right? And so that's somewhat of a deterministic risk. Then there's the probabilistic risk, right? Like, what if all my procurement's running anywhere from 10 to 30% late, right? And those are the types of risks you want to model using maybe simulations or things like that. Gets a little bit more advanced, right? But let's just stay with risks that are somewhat deterministic. They're not guaranteed to happen, but if they happen, you know what the impact of that is. We need to make it much easier for the industry to then just spawn off another version of the schedule, do a what if analysis, what if this happens, and then let me compare all my phase milestones and all my labor chart and all of that stuff. It helps you quantify and put things in a more quantified way in a risk register, right? And you might say, hey, for all of these, then I need to carry this much more duration, this much more dollars, what have you, right? And so each company's policy might differ, but just being able to actualize the thought, right? That, hey, what if this happens? If software is really, really hard to use, then people resort to like gut feel, and like the person with the most gray hair will probably decide what to do with that risk. But if software is easy to use, then sort of data can help you make those decisions.
I want to dive deeper because that was going to be the risk element was the first thing that kind of sparked the light bulb in my head, because what I find in the industry is that most people know it as optimism bias, but it's not exactly quite optimism bias. It's something a little different. It's that as a general sense, we like to think of deterministic planning. And you actually started your sentence about baseline is about risk management, which is specifically about making it or eliminating the situations in which you fail such that the team is likely to succeed. It's the reverse of that thinking. 2 questions. Have I got your thinking correct there? And 2, why do you think that way?
Why do I think
Have I got your thinking correct there? And if so, why? Why do you think that way?
Yeah, and so just let me make sure that your thinking or my thinking is correct. Like, are you saying that my thinking is that the goal of planning is to minimize the chances of failure or maximize chances of success?
Which is different than maximizing the chances of success.
Yeah,
it's a different thought process.
It is both the same and very different, right? It's 2 sides of the same coin. But when people start thinking about minimizing the chance of failure, we're doing 2 things. One is we're acknowledging that inherently we can't control everything, right? There's too many moving parts and we can't control everything. And you start thinking about what's going to kill me. You start to eliminate the sort of the type 1 mistakes, right? Like, what is going to make the project not be profitable, what's going to maybe even bankrupt the company, right? Things like that, right? And you systematically start eliminating those. You spend your time wisely because now you have a Pareto of all the problems you can tackle, and you're not just sort of like the boulders, the stones, and the sand, right? You're not spending all your time worrying about the sand and the random email that's coming through, because you're focused on risk minimization, and hence you gravitate towards the biggest problems first, then you go to the mid-sized problems, and sometimes, trust me, if the smallest problems go unanswered, the project will be fine, and you'll still be fine. Kind of, it's just that attitude, right? It's that it helps people understand and acknowledge, and the whole team understand and acknowledge that we do live in a very unpredictable world.
I think that's a snippet for people there. The way I was taught was you've just said it as the what was it? The boulders, the sand, and what else?
So the thing is that, like, if you
I get the concept. Yeah. What did you
boulders, the stones, and the sand, right?
Boulders, stones, and sand, and I was taught of it as glass balls, stone balls, rubber balls. So glass balls smash and you can never fix them. Stone balls smack on the ground, break someone's toe, but they're fine. And rubber balls rebound up and, hey, you thought it was bad, but you've caught it and actually nothing happened. I actually like your concept better.
I actually like your concept better. So, we can both use both of these now interchangeably. I do like your concept as well.
I have no analogy here. I got to think of one.
Yeah, Michael, what are you adding here? Come on.
Yeah, no, there's nothing on my brain today. I have no cool analogy. I'm sorry. I'll think of one and add it.
Well, I will use your 3-ball analogy, Greg, and give you due credit for it.
Yeah, to be honest, the 3-ball analogy, it's like VCs coaching founders about companies and things like that. So like employee morale is a glass ball, whereas, for example, the email that you haven't answered at 12:01, that's a rubber ball. It's that kind of
Love it.
stuff.
Love it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Micah, any final thoughts?
Well, Nitin, I mean, you're decked out in some swag. And so maybe you want to take this last couple minutes, tell us a little bit about Planera, a little bit about the journey you've been on, and maybe we can just chat a little bit about what you got going on in that space, because I'd hate to have you wear the polo and the cap. Surprised there's not a banner behind you too, and not have a chance to tell people where they can find you and what you got going on.
Yeah, thanks, Micah, for the chance. Planera is, well, the name comes from a new era of planning, so people can remember that. The idea was we fundamentally believe that if more people are involved in the scheduling and planning aspects, it'll result in better project outcomes. It's just like, it's the first principles truism, right? If more people are involved, it's going to result in better outcomes. Too often we see that the tools, especially for master scheduling, right? Especially for the long duration scheduling, too hard, right? And so the builders and the planners who have so much in their head can't actualize their thoughts because the tool's too hard to use, right? And that's the problem we want to solve, is make the tool very approachable so builders can be builders, right? They don't have to be experts at understanding how to use the tool. The way we do that is by digitizing a whiteboard, because every builder loves to use a whiteboard. But then we also made it so that it can actually scale to tens of thousands of activities, because you can't put 10,000 activities on one whiteboard, right? So you get like infinite number of whiteboards. Think of it like Google Maps, right? When you zoom out, is that?
Is that I've seen people try.
Yeah, that won't work. It's kind of like the old map, right? Where every street was all in one map and you had to like open it 12 times. But the new form of doing a map is it's vector and it's contextual, right? You zoom out, you get some level of detail, but you zoom in, you get more and more until you get street view, right? And so we made it something that's easy and simple to use, but it's also very powerful. You can do resource loading, resource planning, risk management, baseline comparison, everything. And then the third thing is we hope that people can use it all the way from level 1 planning to look aheads and phase planning and everything in between. So the data all stays within one platform, because that if data is all available, then you can act on it.
You know, I'm going to do something here that I've never done before and is uncharacteristic of me. I'm actually going to say to people listening here that they should go and try it, because I genuinely believe that collaborative planning is the future of the industry, because it's one of these approaches where once you've experienced it properly, you can never go back. Like in our company, we don't use Microsoft and Excel. We use G Sheets and we use Microsoft Word because we can collaborate. We don't use on-premise agile boards. We use Jira, GitHub, and Asana. And I can foresee a situation where the world doesn't use Microsoft Project and Oracle Primavera P6. It uses collaborative planning software. So long as it's easy to use, it still has the complexities, so you can still do some of the more complex relationships and summarization. And to be honest, it's affordable and integratable into a wider macro system. So all I'm going to say is two things. One, people should go check it out. I love it. And the second is, Nitin, seriously, mate, it's yours to lose. Like if you don't succeed, it'll be on you. Because the idea is solid.
Well, Greg, thank you for that extra pressure, as if we didn't have enough pressure already, but I thrive in that. So yeah, no, I thank you for that, Greg. And I do believe that the industry does need alternatives, and we're trying really hard.
Awesome,
It
folks.
solves a problem. It solves a problem that I actually had to deal with when I was a planner. Like I was actually a PM, and I'd be getting scope documents, and I'd have to pull in the technical authority, the engineers. I was in the UK, so superintendents were called CAMs, control account managers, which are the sub PMs, and I'd be pulling in the planners, the commercial and the cost managers. and we'd all be sitting in a room, and it would be the whole whiteboard thing, and it would, someone would be presenting P6, and it was just, to be honest, boring as hell, because you'd be interacting for like 10 minutes and sitting there doing nothing for 30 because you had nothing to add. In an era where we don't always want to go to work 5 days a week wearing suits, that, to me, that's dead. I hated that process.
All right. Well,
long live this, whatever it is.
Sell your suits.
Long live collaboration. How about that?
There we go.
Hey, there's your new tagline for the swag you're going to send us. And now that's on Cameron, and so we're going to hold you to it. All right, folks, thank you for dialing in this week. We're going to include a ton of links in the show notes, wherever you're listening, on how to find Planera and give it a spin. But for us, from Beyond Deadlines, thank you for calling in and listening this week, and we'll see you on the next one.